right, it's time to talk Dallas Cowboys football on Your Lads Football Network. Something we have not been able to do for a couple of years, so we're very excited about this new opportunity to talk about America's team. And RJ Ochoa joins us, editor-in-chief from bloggingtheboys.com. RJ, thanks for doing this.
Of course, great to be with you. I don't know how you could go years without talking about the Cowboys. I'm not programmed to do that personally.
Well, it's been a few years since we've had an expert analyst, an insider, to talk Dallas Cowboys. So, yeah. But that's true. If we don't have an analyst, it is, we don't talk about the Cowboys much. So you are right about that. So I'm glad we had this opportunity.
That doesn't prevent a lot of people from offering Cowboys opinions, but it's something I'm grateful for, to say the least.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully this will be the beginning of a lot more, because this is, if not it is one of the most popular teams, of course, in the NFL. And matter of fact, I actually grew up. I've always been a Jet fan, but there were always points when I was really young, like probably about 7 or 8. And I was still trying to, of course, I gravitated to the local teams, but the Cowboys were actually a team that was my favorite out of area team. And then I kind of grew up and went with the Jets. But yeah, I think that was the case for a lot of kids growing up like me back in the 70s. There wasn't a whole lot out there. So you basically went with usually 5 teams, Cowboys, Steelers, teams like that. And that's why there are a lot of Dallas Cowboy fans today. Just didn't work out for me, but I understand the infatuation with the franchise.
Yeah, totally. I think, anytime you have really popular teams and really, contentious rivalries or whatever, everyone kind of picks a side. I think everyone, everyone had to pick a side between Warriors and Caps. You were either Team LeBron or Team Warriors. And so everyone just kind of if it's on your screen, if you're being, inundated with something, you have to kind of assign some level of emotional joy or sadness to one team or another. And the Cowboys, you mentioned the 70s. I mean, you could have gone Vikings, could have been a lot worse, around then. Or even, I guess, if you're really stretching, the Rams or Dolphins. Washington was kind of coming along. Cowboys remain strong and remain entertaining.
Yeah, matter of fact, back then it was Steelers, Cowboys. So who'd you go for? Watching those Super Bowls. And they were completely different dynamics, the franchises. So you had to pick one or the other, and I chose the Cowboys at that time. But anyway, let's talk about the 2023 version of the Dallas Cowboys. Year 4 from Mike McCarthy. And how's that going? How do the fans take into Mike McCarthy?
I've often said that Mike's greatest crime in the NFL has been that he lost a PR battle to Aaron Rodgers. And so that has really shaped, I think, a lot of people's opinion of him. I'm not going to sit here and say that he was a more valuable asset to the Packers than Aaron Rodgers, but the way all of that went down has led people to believe that he's worthless. You know what I mean? That he offers nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It was all Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. And so I think I think maybe 20% of the fan base believes he's underrated in that sense. He provides much more than people would kind of give him credit for. I do think 80% believe he's just this figurehead. The offense was all Kellen Moore. Dan Quinn's the guy who's really in charge.
Of course.
What is Mike even doing here?
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of the way things go. But he has, you mentioned you hadn't talked Cowboys in depth. The Cowboys were a playoff team last year. They won 12 games. It was the first time they had been a playoff team in consecutive seasons since 2006 and 2007. And it was the first time that they had won double-digit games in back-to-back years since 1995 and 1996. And obviously, that's the basically entire Cowboys, Super Bowl drought. But being better than Dave Campo and Chan Gailey is not worth, putting you in the Hall of Fame over anything. But again, people think this dude's chopped liver when he's done a lot of things that are really foreign to this generation of the Cowboys. And so I do think he's a bit underrated. I'd still, for my money, if I had to pick the best coach in the division, I think people would really flock towards Nick Sirianni right now, obviously coming off the Eagles Super Bowl appearance. But there's people who think Brian Daboll's a better coach. And no disrespect to Brian Daboll, but again, Mike McCarthy is kind of this dude who gets no credit for anything good that ever happened that he's a part of.
And, I'm sure he probably only cares about one guy's opinion, and that's it. That's all that matters. It's Jerry Jones and how he thinks about him. And how do you think Jerry Jones thinks about Mike McCarthy?
People used to say that Jason Garrett, myself included, that he understood that he was kind of the CEO of the team, not really the head coach. And yes. he kind of walked the proper walk. I think Mike McCarthy isn't down for that in a very, very positive way. And so I do think he cares what Jerry Jones thinks, but I also think he doesn't, which is something that separates him from Garrett. This was 3 years ago now, but every Friday, Jerry does one of his two weekly appearances on the radio affiliate of the Cowboys, 105.3 The Fan. And Mike McCarthy's press conference sometimes coincides with this.
All right.
And so Jerry had just said in real time, like 5 minutes before, Terrence Steele is going to be starting at right tackle on Sunday. So Mike McCarthy's asked about this, and he says, we haven't decided who's going to be starting at right tackle. And again, like these seem like small, insignificant things, but they are rather large. And I do think that again, nobody wants to give Mike McCarthy credit for anything, even things like being charming. So the line that everyone has stuck to Mike McCarthy like glue this offseason has been what he said at the NFL Combine about how the Cowboys want to run the ball. And that is the only thing that anybody wants to bring up with Mike McCarthy. Oh, Cowboys want to run the ball this year, blah, blah. Never mind the fact that 1 week later, they cut Zeke Elliott and traded for Brandon Cooks. But Mike McCarthy said that they want to run the ball. And so I think that Mike McCarthy understands, this is my opinion, that he works for an ownership group that built their NFL empire on the shoulders of the NFL's all-time leading rusher. And I think he understands that it's important to them to feel like they're a running team. And that's what I'm saying. I don't think he gets enough credit for being able to scratch the right places at the right times. And again, is he a perfect coach? Is he, a Hall of Famer or anything? I don't know. But I think he is much more adept at this than the average person is willing to believe.
And it is not easy being the head coach under Jerry Jones. That is something that he should get credit for as well. So, but look, it's all about, now that they've been to back-to-back playoffs, it's about making that next step. It's about winning games in the postseason and putting yourself at least in a position to be in that championship game, to be one step away from the Super Bowl. And we take a look at training camp will open up with a new offensive coordinator. You mentioned the offensive coordinator situation. So Brian Schottenheimer takes over. And as a Jet fan, I'm well-versed in Schottenheimer. I'm well-versed. Well, believe it or not, I actually stuck up for Schottenheimer. And I did that because I would always say, you know how the New York media can be. And I would always say, just look at the numbers, will you? He had a rookie quarterback, and the team still led the NFL in rushing. That's pretty hard to do when you have a rookie quarterback and everybody's trying to stop the run, and you still find a way to lead the league in rushing. He's not that bad. He's not great. I get it, but stop picking on the guy. So I always think that Brian Schottenheimer gets a bad rap, but Russell Wilson liked him. He had a nice little tenure there with Russell. I think that goes a long way. So anyway, what do you think is going to happen as far as what he's going to do? What is he going to bring something to the offense? Like, is he going to tweak it a little bit, or is this Mike McCarthy's offense now and Schottenheimer's there to do what McCarthy says? How's it going to run this year compared to the last few years under Kellen Moore?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't mean to discredit Brian Schottenheimer and the title on his office door. But I think his greatest asset is that he's a McCarthy guy, right? Mike McCarthy is the offensive play caller. You need somebody you can trust to kind of install during the week when you're handling all of the kind of standard head coaching duties. And that's, it's the low-hanging fruits. People do point out Schottenheimer's time with the Jets, obviously certain times with the Seahawks. And, wow, this is the guy the Cowboys are hitching their wagon to. Never mind the fact that Mike McCarthy is the obviously, offensive play caller, which is what matters the most. And so, I mean, the terminology is very popular. The West Coast offense, the Cowboys, I'm sure you've seen have labeled it a Texas Coast offense, because they've implemented some of their own sorts of things to marry into Mike McCarthy's West Coast scheme and West Coast principles that he learned partly under Brian's father and Marty Schottenheimer. I think that goes undersold in that story. It was Marty who gave Mike McCarthy his first NFL job ever.
Wow.
And so he's very tied to the Schottenheimer family, and obviously a great NFL family in their own right. And so,
sure.
I mean, this is Mike McCarthy's offense. And I think, does he have a quarterback as talented as Aaron Rodgers in his prime? Obviously not. But I think that Dak is also a little bit underrated. People are harping on the interception thing. And again, they got rid of the bell cow, right? Like I think this is the, to be super 30,000 foot perspective about it, I think this is the Mike McCarthy offense where the run game is Ryan Grant and James Starks, right? Like Mike McCarthy's not looking for Eddie Lacy. Obviously, they have Tony Pollard, who's very talented, but they want to spread the ball out. I think that we're going to see them, and be moderate about that. I think they do want to run the ball, but I don't think they want to throw it 40 times a game. But I do think they want to challenge things vertically in a way that Kellen wouldn't. I think Kellen was a little bit cautious sometimes in challenging things through the air. Okay. So I think the Cowboys will be a little bit more risky just because they also know they have an all-world defense to kind of make up for things if things don't bounce their way on a particular moment in time.
Okay. Well, obviously, we've been taking a look at that. Not that we're going to see much of it in the preseason, but that'll be something to watch once the season begins. And I'm sure there's a bunch of fantasy football fans watching as well. So maybe they'll be interested in hearing that. Let's take a look at the camp battles and the roster in general. So I'm actually going to pop up here the depth chart at our lads. And we'll stick on offense, of course. And at the running back position, might as well start there. So Pollard on the tag. What do you suspect there? That Pollard will wind up signing a tag next year and then he'll be gone, which is usually the case with the tag deals. Players usually sign it for a year or two and then they leave.
Right. So at the time that you and I are talking, he is the only of the three tagged running backs who has signed it. So there's no drama associated with him. He is coming back from the fractured fibula, so I wouldn't be shocked if the Cowboys give him a couple of veteran rest days, obviously, throughout the course of camp. But so, yeah, I mean, I think it's the Tony Pollard show. We have yet to see him really absorb a heavy usage campaign. I don't know that they want to do that. The hot name is Deuce Vaughn. Everybody obviously saw his draft story. The Cowboys did sign Ronald Jones in free agency to give them another option. A lot of Cowboys fans are concerned with who's your goal line back. Zeke had 1 million touchdowns last year down near the goal line. A name that a lot of us like is undrafted free agent Hunter Luepke, kind of a fullback, Swiss Army knife sort of dude. Obviously, John Kuhn, is a memory that a lot of people have of Mike McCarthy's time in Green Bay. You could kind of see him being that guy. Really? Makes sense on paper at least. Okay. But maybe you never wind up on the goal line, right? Like things kind of wind up funny sometimes in football like that. Maybe you're always at first and goal on the 7. You know what I'm saying? Things can be funny in certain respects, but I don't think they're hearkening for Mike Tolbert sort of dude to just kind of plow in. But the conversation about Zeke really has never gone away. That has been something that people have thrown out for obviously every day since he was released. Now, for what it's worth, if you care about the context, the Cowboys did give Stephon Gilmore number 21. Again, if you put any stock into these things. But Zeke's first tweet, again, we're reaching really deep into the barrel here, after the Cowboys released him, was that he wanted his number 15 back, which he obviously wore at Ohio State. Now, when Zeke was drafted, running backs were not allowed to wear single-digit numbers or numbers below 20, but they are now. So if Zeke were to find a new home, he could totally wear number 15. So it would be very Cowboys to bring Zeke back and let him wear number 15 and then sell all of those jerseys. But outside of the kind of comic book story that would be, I really have a hard time seeing them bring it back.
Is there someone out there? I don't know, Leonard Fournette. Is there a bigger back, somebody that's capable of taking those types of that type of role that could be signed by the Cowboys late in the offseason?
I don't think so. At least nothing that feels like a priority. They still have Malik Davis, who was on their roster last year, Rico Dowdle. They were both undrafted free agents. So they have names, they have bodies. And I don't think they're concerned with their third or fourth running back option right now, because again, I mean they didn't trade for Brandon Cooks to worry about who RB2 was going to be to feed carries to.
Yes. Okay. So, and you mentioned Dowdle and Davis, so they're going to compete with Vaughn for that, and Jones. Is that an open competition? You believe anybody can get that number 2 job right now?
I think so. I normally wouldn't put a ton of stock into a 6th round rookie, but there's no way Deuce Vaughn isn't making the team after his kind of story and everything. So you really Davis won out last year, but Dowdle got hurt. A lot of people loved Dowdle in the preseason and training camp a year ago, but and Rojo does kind of feel like the first one out. Like if you had to take some odds. But he does have some veteran presence. He's won a Super Bowl each of the last 2 years. If you put he's won 2 Super Bowls, not over the last 2 years, but maybe. I mean, but I don't know that he's got the build to be like that, thickening goal line, need a yard, got to push over the line of scrimmage dude.
Okay. Now let's talk about the tight ends, because this is a big deal with Dalton Schultz gone. The team drafts Schumacher in round 2. So are we looking at a battle, you think? Or Ferguson will be the guy early? Or do you think Schumacher has an opportunity this camp to possibly even be the number 1 guy right off the bat?
There's a lot of people ready to hand the job to Jake Ferguson, who was a 4th round pick a year ago. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but he had something like 19 catches last year. I mean, it's just an incredibly small sample size. It was Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot was an undrafted free agent a year ago. So, I mean, I understand they have seniority, but the Cowboys didn't spend a 2nd round pick on Luke to watch him sit and chill either. So, I mean, I do think it is an open job. Of all the, you mentioned the depth chart and you guys are the best at that. That's probably the most true, roster, challenge fight that there is. Everything else is pretty chalk down the line.
Okay.
But there is a bit of a seriously open competition at tight end. Dak Prescott has always had production with his tight ends. Obviously, Dalton Schultz benefited from that. But we'll see who winds up winning it. It does feel like training camp will be important for that.
All right. And as far as the depth overall, Hendershot, he's going to have to hold off. Do you think, is this a 3 or 4-man unit?
I think it's 3. Sean McEwen is the 4th option, kind of in the mix, really, if there is a 4th name. Okay. The Cowboys like him. He's been around for a minute, had a few cups of coffee. But it so depends. And obviously, training camp and preseason, there's injuries and things that pop up. It depends where you want to go long. Are you going to carry 3 quarterbacks, right? Like, you've got to make cuts at certain places. And Sean McEwen is one of those sort of, 54th, 55th guys right now when it comes to whittling things down.
All right, wide receiver, and the big 3 is now set, so that's easy enough with Lamb, Gallup, and Cooks. But after that, I mean, Tolbert's the one that really the Cowboys are hoping can make that jump from because they talked very highly of him as from what I remember last year. But he's a rookie. Not every rookie has a good rookie season. He had his rookie issues, of course. But what do you have? 89 snaps. Did he have some injuries as well last year?
He did not. He just really struggled. It was, the Cowboys went about the receiver position very strangely a year ago, in that they traded away Amari Cooper for nothing. Whatever you want to believe, how they fell out of love with him so quickly. They re-signed Michael Gallup, who was coming off of a torn ACL that he suffered in January of 2022, week 17 of the 2021 season. And so they really just kind of banked on CeeDee Lamb becoming an alpha. And he did. I mean, all proper credit to CeeDee, but there was no Robin to kind of accompany CeeDee's Batman performance, which is really what showed up all throughout the season. That's why they danced around with Odell. That's why they brought in T.Y. Hilton. It's often said, obviously, that it takes players another year to kind of come back from the torn ACL, which is why there's a little bit more optimism around Michael Gallup this year. So it does feel, like they devoted serious resources there. I mean, they signed James Washington a year ago. He had 1 catch for the team before they cut him in December. And you're right. They gassed up Jalen Tolbert because they needed him to really show up as a rookie, which, you could argue is certainly a little bit unfair pressure to place on a rookie 3rd round pick. And so I think a lot of us are excited about Tolbert because the expectation is so much lower for him. The responsibility is so much lower. There's a lot more freedom to kind of be able to go out and just make plays and just kind of, be calm and be yourself, especially with the addition of Cooks. And so, yeah, but he is kind of icing on top of the cake right now. Whatever you can get from him is a net gain at this point.
And then as far as the rest, though, because we're pretty confident, of course, to get the three, you got Tolbert, but Fehoko and Turpin, I mean, they combined for barely 101 snaps, I believe, last year. And after that, I don't really see a whole lot. So who should we be keeping an eye on? If they keep 6, those last 2 spots, what's the battle?
It depends what you believe, because the Cowboys can be a bit archaic with things. And Turpin's real value is as a returner. Obviously, he set the world on fire in the preseason a year ago. He did not have a single return touchdown throughout the regular season, but certainly helped out in the field position game. But we've seen, the NFL as a whole kind of mitigate whatever advantage you can glean from returners. And so if he's not contributing on offense and if he's not playing special teams in any other way, what does he really bring to your team? So Turpin is kind of on, I wouldn't say thin ice, but precarious ice. Fehoko has never really evolved, but he's never really had an opportunity. Noah Brown did such a great job of kind of holding him off. So you would have to imagine this is a really critical training camp for him. The Cowboys do love to kind of keep a UDFA receiver. That's kind of something you can set your bingo card by. Jalen Moreno-Cropper is maybe the clubhouse favorite right now to kind of be that guy. Dennis Houston did manage to make the initial roster last year before being relegated to the practice squad. Some of that was, Gallup was on, injury designation and things like that. So that afforded him an opportunity. But yeah, I mean, I think that final 2 spots come down to Fehoko, Turpin, if they do value him enough in the return game, Moreno-Cropper, Dennis Houston. It's a crowded bunch, but you're right. It's really only the top 4 that you can kind of take to the bank right now.
And then on the offensive line, there'll be some changes here soon because there's a couple of guys up there in age, Martin and Tyron Smith. What's the latest on Zach Martin? We're hearing about him potentially not coming to camp. What's up with that?
Yeah, that broke today. The day you and I are chatting. He's a relatively chill dude, so this really kind of was a true and total surprise. No real idea, honestly. You can make a strong argument that he's the best guard, the best interior lineman in the NFL. In fact, ESPN's executive coach scout rankings did have him as the best interior lineman. If you care about Madden's rating, they have him as a 99 overall, right? Like the consensus agrees he is inordinately good. But he's not paid, like the best guard in the NFL. Quentin Nelson's getting $20 million a year. And the Cowboys are in a bit of a pickle with a lot of contractual situations. Dak Prescott needs an extension. Trayvon Diggs is entering the final year of his rookie contract. CeeDee Lamb is eligible for an extension. Tyler Biadasz and Terrence Steele along the offensive line are entering the final year of their deals. Pollard, if you want to put him into the mix, obviously on the franchise tag. And if whatever, of these deals you don't get done, next offseason, Micah Parsons is eligible for an extension. So things get really complicated really fast. And so kudos to Zach for using that leverage, right? Like they are stuck. They need to get this done. There's no way they can kind of wait and drag their feet. Now, the Cowboys do historically get these long-term deals done traditionally while in Oxnard. It's just something about kind of being there, everyone all together on the same property. So we've kind of been assuming, the Diggs or Lamb or whatever deals would kind of fall. I guess you can kind of add Martin to that mix now. As far as positionally, he's the most chalk that you can kind of line up as the right guard. Tyler Biadasz is at center. Everything else you could figure out, but is in a bit of flux. Tyler Smith was a revelation last year as a rookie, but will he play left guard? Will he play left tackle? At this time a year ago, the plan was Tyron Smith at left tackle. He didn't even make it, to the regular season. So Tyler Smith had to kick out. And the Cowboys had to kind of figure things out at left guard forever. Now, Terrence Steele was their right tackle, but he was injured in December of last year. We don't know if he's going to be healthy enough to start. And so a lot of this depends on what the Cowboys want to do. Are you committed to Tyler Smith at left tackle now? If so, where are you going to play Tyron? Are you going to play him then at right tackle where he played when Terrence Steele got hurt? Are you going to play Tyron at left tackle and Tyler at left guard? Terrence at right tackle. That's what a lot of people believe is the best option. But what happens if and when Tyron Smith gets hurt? You got to kick Tyler out. I mean, there's a number of amalgamations you can make here, and you can feel good about a number of them. But the unpredictability of current injuries and hypothetical injuries clouds the mud a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't expect. I knew there'd be some, some movement there, but I didn't expect it to be that confusing. And that's going to be something to watch for sure. Do they have any bodies on the bench in case there are some issues, whether a holdout or someone being not healthy like Steele? Who would that be? And they did add a 5th round pick in this draft. Mm-hmm. But besides that, I don't see an awful lot on their depth chart. I just don't see an awful lot of players with a lot of experience. I know they used up a couple of picks the last few years on some players. So who's worthy of potentially spot starting?
I think, the most depth, I guess, they have along the interior is Matt Farniok. Chuma Edoga was one of their free agent signings this year from your Jets.
Yes.
They've talked about playing Terrence Steele at left guard. That would presumably be in a world where Tyler is at left tackle and Tyron is at right tackle. They've talked about Josh Ball at left guard. He's typically just kind of been in a swing tackle, reserve tackle role for them. He was awful at it a year ago. So they have the most names on a paper as far as interior depth. I think most people feel good about their tackle depth. It's just, who are they going to be, right? Like, they have 3 quality tackles in Tyler Smith, Tyron Smith, and Terrence Steele, but who's healthy, who's not healthy, right? Like, those are the weird questions. They do have Matt Waletzko, who was taken with the pick that they acquired in the Amari Cooper trade a year ago. He missed all of last year, his rookie season. He's a big mountain of a man. So, there's a lot of hope, but there's a whole lot of unprovenness there as well. So, yeah, I mean, I would say it feels very solid, but I mean, it is the house that the little piggy built of straw right now. One, huff and puff, and it could come down rather easily.
It sounds it. But then again, maybe it all works out. So definitely something to be concerned about, but we'll see, because the offensive line, we all know how important that position is on a team. All right. By the way, Biadasz, you mentioned him. He always seems to be just a guy. Like, he's not superior talent. He's not terrible, but the Cowboys, they like him. They feel like he's definitely their guy. As long as they don't have to overpay for him, I would guess.
Yeah, he's coming off his first Pro Bowl. He's entering a contract year. They traded up to draft him in 2020. Actually, traded with the Eagles, which is always a fun, little wrinkle to it. They really Indiana Jones idol swapped. I mean, it was the offseason Travis Frederick retired, and then they drafted Tyler Biadasz. I mean, both, kind of literally the same person. Like, these centers, both from Wisconsin. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of an amazing coincidence that they've been able to kind of ride this through. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they like him at the right price. I think they probably, would be smart to get ahead of this instead of waiting until free agency a year from now. He has some rapport with Dak Prescott, obviously, and he's, coming along, kind of finding his peak as an NFL player. But they do have, Matt Farniok, who I mentioned, does have some center flexibility if they really got to kind of, move things around. But again, I mean, I mentioned all the instability, at the 2 tackles and left guard. The only spots you can really rely on people are at center and right guard with Zach Martin. So he is a much more valuable piece to their overall puzzle than meets the eye. I mean, I could see him being, an odd man out because of all the big contracts they're going to have to hand out to different players.
Okay. And the number 2 center, is that Farniok or is it Hoffman?
I would probably say Farniok, unless he's playing left guard. Unless, there is a world where they just decide Tyler's left tackle, Terrence is right tackle, and Tyron is on the bench. They haven't really explored that possibility yet to this point, but obviously they're being a bit mum about everything. But in that world, they do need a left guard. And so if Matt Farniok is doing that, then, that obviously eliminates him from the possibility. But in that world, if Tyler got hurt, Tyler Biadasz, that is, You would imagine that Farniok would slip over to center and Chuma Edoga or somebody would get promoted to left guard. It doesn't help that there's two Tylers, there's two Smiths, there's all sorts of
Tyrone.
Terrence Steele has the same initials, so it makes talking about them very difficult.
Yeah. And then we'll see how Richards does during camp and preseason, because that'll be a big help as well. Okay, so let's move over to defense. And so I know the defense, especially nowadays, nobody really plays a 4-3, 3-4 anymore. It is what it is. But what apparently, so Quinn has done, from what I've read, he's made some changes to his overall long-term approach that he had at Atlanta and even before that. And what was that? Is that playing more cover two? What exactly is it that Quinn is doing differently now with the Cowboys? And if the Cowboys did have a base defense, what would that be?
I mean, it's probably nickel, but I would say nickel is the new base for everyone, right? Like, who is in nickel 89% of the time, whatever.
Yeah.
And sometimes sometimes it's three safeties on the field. That's what's been, fun. The Cowboys have been a team that historically hasn't really prioritized the safety position. It's just kind of been your rotation of random dudes. But J-Ron Kearse, the Cowboys signed before Dan Quinn's first season. And I mean, he was somebody that was like, this dude's not even going to make the roster.
Yeah.
And he has been amazing. But he's the kind of true linebacker safety hybrid. That first season, the Cowboys signed Keanu Neal, who had worked with Dan Quinn in Atlanta. And, that was, we didn't realize it at the time, but there were all sorts of reports like he's going to play some linebacker. And we were like, what? This is a little strange. But that was, kind of where this all began. So he's got those. The Cowboys drafted DeMarvion Overshown out of the University of Texas this year, who has some safety experience as well. So you can kind of see him as that future, same sort of guy that J-Ron Kearse is, who coincidentally is entering the final year of his contract that he signed a year ago. So they're more classic safeties are Malik Hooker, who really showed up last year, and Donovan Wilson, who was so good, who went to the better school in Texas A&M, where I went to school. But so he has kind of turned out as their classic strong safety, your thumper, your big time hitter, whereas Malik Hooker is more of your center fielder. And I think that's the biggest, most obvious difference in change from Dan Quinn. Yeah, he loves to rush the passer. Yeah, he loves to send all sorts of pass rushers. Like that's vintage Dan Quinn though. But it's been really, really fun to watch him play around with those three safeties.
Yeah, because I noticed that all the three safety usage and two linebackers. That's really the given from what I noticed last year. And again, you mentioned Hooker, a former first-round draft pick, has really seemed to play well with the Cowboys the last couple of years. And you mentioned Wilson and then Kearse. So that's an underrated safety trio. I'm not sure a lot of fans outside of Dallas knows how good those three guys have really played together. So that's a big part of how the Cowboys defense has excelled. And then you mentioned before Gilmore. So, wow, what a big move to bring in Gilmore. If he could be healthy, that's your elite number one. And now Diggs becomes a number two, which just really ups their defense even more.
Yeah, on one of our podcasts recently, I just kind of openly, it's funny that Zach Martin happened after this, but I kind of openly wondered, like, why wouldn't Trayvon hold out? This is the final year of his deal. The Bills, just they can get out of that Stephon Diggs deal next year. You would imagine that it would be strategic on the Diggs's, brothers' behalf to kind of be in cahoots with one another to figure things out. And so if you don't get Diggs done now, it could get really complicated for you as the Cowboys. And they've made no secret about how they want to play together. And so, I mean, I don't know, what happens in that potential world. But, yeah, Gilmore gives them such stability. They haven't really had a proper running mate for Diggs. It feels like it's been forever. It's only been 3 years at this point. But they have two great nickel corner options when they're playing in that alignment. Jordan Lewis has kind of been that guy, but he was injured last year. And Deron Bland, a fifth round pick, came on and was just absolutely amazing. Sauce Gardner obviously deserved Defensive Rookie of the Year, but Deron Bland, I thought, deserved at least like a mention in the sentence because he was really, really, phenomenal, especially as a fifth round pick. So outside of them, it is difficult to feel great about the corner depth. The Cowboys have Kelvin Joseph, who they took in the second round 2 years ago, and Nashawn Wright, who they took a round later. There's been talk about moving Kelvin to safety, using him on special teams, which isn't a promising thing to see for a third-year, second-round cornerback. So it's difficult to count on him. But yeah, those top three are it's among the best cornerback. It's among the best secondary that the Cowboys have had in maybe my lifetime.
You mentioned Bland, and okay, you noticed the 5 interceptions right away, and that's big. What about his game? Because yeah, it's very rare for any rookie, let alone a 5th-round draft pick in the secondary, to perform as well as Bland did. Did he do anything specific that stood out? Because he's got a chance to start, right? I mean, that's going to be a camp competition with Lewis.
We talked about the funny roster math. Lewis may start the season on PUP. That might be something that kind of works out for the team overall. That's why I'd imagine Bland is kind of the first up nickel corner option.
Okay.
And so that's just where he excels. And before the Gilmore trade, we just kind of said, okay, well, maybe you kick Duran outside. We've seen him do that sparingly, but he's certainly capable of it. And he's your sort of other corner opposite of Trayvon. But now that you can just limit him to the slot, that does seem to be where he is the most comfortable. And again, you've got to have a really fast dude there, and he's capable of playing that way, which is exciting. I mean, again, they missed on their second and third round corners the year before, but they found one. And you give them 3 tries, they'll make sure to find somebody who can contribute.
Okay, so then who's fighting for a roster spot in the secondary? Because Scott was drafted this year in the 6th round. You mentioned a few guys already off the bench. Is it pretty? I mean, do you believe like Wright and Joseph will make the team, or do you think even those guys are going to have to fight for a spot?
I think it's worth mentioning that Scott got some run with the first team during OTAs, and some of that was that Gilmore got some rest and Trayvon was not there, not for contractual reasons. So you're kind of down bodies, but the fact that he was given preference over Joseph and Wright says a lot. Now the Cowboys did trade up for Scott. He had a funky 40 time, and his insistence was that there was an issue with that, and so. But again, they traded up for him. He was a visit of theirs. They fell in love. So kind of like receiver, I would imagine those 4 are very safe. The Cowboys do have C.J. Goodwin. I don't know off the top of my head where you all have him listed on your depth chart, but he is more of a special teamer, more of a gunner that the Cowboys do technically list as a cornerback.
Okay.
But he has a lot of special teams contributions that make him a valuable roster piece. But again, he technically gets lumped into that when you're counting the positions. And so technically that puts you at 5. Are you carrying 7 to take both Joseph and Wright because of their contracts? It's hard to get rid of third-year players, that are second and third round picks that you still have another year of team control over. But the math is what the math is. There's also Israel Mukuamu, who was a revelation last year as well. He's got some corner safety flexibility, so you can, depending on where you want to rank him, but he played some great nickel corner last year as well. And so, I mean, I don't know that even both, or I don't know that one of Joseph or Wright are guaranteed a roster spot, but I think they're at the very least fighting with one another.
Okay. And then up front, again, the 2 linebackers, Van Der Esch and Clark. I got to ask you, so Van Der Esch, he has this big rookie season, and I know he had a pretty good season last year too, but did he have some injuries, did I recall, or what was it exactly that changed for him after such a big rookie season? Was it position change? What was it?
So it was 18 that he was a rookie, and that was Jalen Smith's best year with the team as well. And then in 19, it just didn't work, and Leighton started to kind of get injured, which was the rap on him coming out of Boise State. In 20, he got injured as well. And then in 21, the Cowboys took Micah Parsons, and originally when because he was evaluated as an off-ball linebacker, that changed rather quickly. But originally, that seemed to spell the end of Leighton. Particularly because the team did not pick up his 5th-year option for the 2022 season. So Leighton was awesome in 21, signed a 1-year prove-it deal with the Cowboys before last year. It really was this linchpin of their run support. Honestly, the most important player at defending the run. He was just so good. Did get hurt again last year briefly, but came back, and so they were able to bring him back. He is so important, and he really has shed that label, which has been so impressive from him. You mentioned Clark. A lot of people thought he would redshirt last year, obviously coming off the fusion surgery, but he was awesome. Other than that, that's probably, if I had to pick where I would like to see them add any sort of depth, it would be linebacker because Jabril Cox hasn't come along. They do have Devin Harper. They have other names and other projects and things like that, but if Clark or Van Der Esch were to be injured, they'd be up a creek a little bit.
That's true. And that shows you how big the draft pick was to get Overshown in there to help out. So could we see, where do they hold? Do they hold 4 linebackers?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I think at least 4, and it depends what you classify Micah Parsons as. You know what I mean? Like some of that is that, but yeah, I mean, you need a little bit of depth, certainly, and again, what you classify Overshown as, right? Like that's what kind of makes this fun and unique and interesting. Even because Curse is kind of linebacker support. That's kind of why you don't totally need another body. And Marquise Bell kind of fits that mold. So it's weird. It's funky. It's kind of a new age. But still, I mean, for what it's worth, they did sign Anthony Barr at training camp last year. So they did add to the position group during camp.
Yeah, for one thing, for sure, you go to camp or you try to follow the Cowboys this preseason and during camp, it's not going to be easy. And I think that's good. I think it's fun for fans that can just take a look at how your team is going to be constructed, and especially when there's talent on the team. Okay, so moving on to the defensive line, and again, mentioned the edge guys. You got Parsons, of course. That's where another strength of the team, of course, because Parsons being the monster he is. But Armstrong, 13.5 sacks the last 2 years, 8.5 last year. What's happened to Lawrence? He had 25 sacks between 17 and 18, but only 20.5 sacks the last 4 years.
I think DeMarcus Lawrence is probably overpaid but underrated. It's a weird kind of double truth. He is such an important piece at defending the run. He just doesn't have the sack numbers that you expect pass rushers who get paid like that to have. But he is probably the second most important player on their defense, obviously outside of Micah Parsons. And so he does provide a great strength. It just, the people who kind of box score, jump, give him a hard time for that.
Yeah.
But the Cowboys are fortunate that they have a lot of pass rushers outside of them. The Dorrance Armstrong deal, it felt like a consolation prize when Randy Gregory walked in free agency, but he was amazing a year ago. Sam Williams as a rookie was amazing. So they really, have a lot of players who people are kind of excited to see. Dante Fowler, really had a bit of a resurgence under Dan Quinn. So it is exciting. I do think they'll be, I don't say cautious, but they'll be smart with Micah Parsons. That's why, if you said his over under on sacks at like 13, 14, I'd probably take the unders. I don't think they want him playing, a million snaps because they know how valuable he is. They don't want him to gas out before the playoffs start. And so that's a first world problem if you're a really good team and you can count on being in the playoffs, but you do have to kind of pay mind to that throughout the rigors of a regular season.
And taking a look at, by the way, they used a 4th round pick on Fehoko, who I always, I looked at him going into the draft as a interesting player because playing out west, he doesn't get obviously the notoriety that you would here. So I was happy to see him get a 4th round deal there. That was nice for him. And then Mazi Smith, an interior nose tackle, 1st round. So those are a couple of guys, especially Smith. Now, Fehoko, he's going to have time to develop, but Mazi Smith, that's going to be a big part of the defense. And what do they want most from him?
I think they want chaos. I mean, I think that they, the big thing that was said was they hadn't taken a defensive tackle in the 1st round since 1991 when they took Russell Maryland #1 overall.
That was a good one.
It's, we said it a lot. We got a lot of run out of that. But, I mean, I would say that, you've probably said the top 3 teams in the conference are the Cowboys, the Niners, and the Eagles in whatever order, you want to place them. Well, the Eagles and Niners can run the ball. And even if you discount the Eagles, the team that has bounced the Cowboys the last 2 years have been the Niners. They did it with Brock Purdy at quarterback and Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, it wasn't because they were throwing for 400 yards. It was because they were running all over them. And a year ago, after the first Niners loss, the Cowboys talked about wanting to get a lot more tough. They felt like they were soft in that playoff loss, that one at home. They wanted to get some glass eaters. They drafted John Ridgway out of Arkansas. They had to cut him or waive him for roster purposes, and Washington picked him up, which was unfortunate. But that partly, was a domino that led to Mozzie Smith. So, I mean, they are tired of getting run over, I think, and they're tired of teams manipulating their defense and taking Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence out of the equation because they can run up the middle and run all over them. And so that's their hope, is that Mozzie kind of is that dude. I don't think anybody needs him to be Aaron Donald, but if you can be Pete Fletcher Cox, if you can be, any version of Warren Sapp on the field, that's going to go a long way, I think, at providing some support for the defenses in the overall.
Who should we be keeping an eye on as far as any players on defense in general that could have a breakout this year, or just a player that fans outside of Dallas don't realize is actually better than they think?
I think Damone Clark, because it's really hard to not be known if you're a Cowboys player nationally. And Clark was a really popular name at the collegiate level. He had the famed number 18 at LSU, so he's got some leadership qualities to his game as well. The Cowboys kind of brought him along a little bit slowly last year because he was coming back. I mean, this is his first full offseason of activity in the NFL. So again, it's difficult to say. Watch out for DeMarcus Lawrence. Watch out for J. Ron Hurts. So
yes,
I would say Damone Clark's probably that name.
Yeah, because I was high on Clark coming in last year. I saw him in a few big games, and he really stepped up, especially late that year. And then for him to get taken in the 5th round, it was like, wow, what a bargain for the Cowboys to be able to get that kid in the 5th. And I know why, but that's still a bargain.
It felt like the Nakobe Dean thing for the Eagles, except all due respect to Nakobe Dean, it worked out right away. And we'll see, obviously, about Nakobe this season, but the Cowboys, look to have the early edge in that particular race.
Who has to fight for a roster spot on the defensive line?
I mean, maybe those down the line edge rushers, but I mean, if they go deep somewhere, they go heavy somewhere, it's probably there. Now, people have said, Dorrance Armstrong would make sense as a trade piece, but like, what are you trading for? Like, what are you in desperate need of right now?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, if you told me like, who's the good player you're most comfortable trading, it's probably him. That obviously alleviates a roster spot, but I just have a difficult time understanding what that would be for at this point, unless you're trading for like a proper left guard to give yourself, more stability there.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that, it's tough. The only true roster battles are Kelvin Joseph and Nahshon Wright. They're really, really consistent, lately as far as personnel, which is why they've been so good.
And is Hankins, is he a lock to make the team?
Yeah, I think so. They traded for him a week before the deadline last year, and he really helped shore up the run support. So it's a big deal they were to bring him back. And so everybody was kind of pleased with that. And then they obviously drafted Mozzie Smith. And so they want options. I mean, I think, I've criticized them in the past for they've built their team for best case scenario, right? And it's when the attrition begins that they're just not prepared for it. And they've really kind of remade themselves to be able to withstand injuries and whatever may happen throughout the course of an NFL season.
And before I let you go, 2 quick ones. One on offense. Give me a player. You gave Clark on defense. Give me a potential breakout guy on offense that nobody really knows about.
People know about him, but I would certainly say Michael Gallup is probably the most slept on because of the injury last year. You brought up fantasy. He might provide the highest return on investment. Like because people are CeeDee Lamb's going to go early in whatever draft you're doing, and people know the name Brandon Cooks. He's on the Cowboys now. He's the name that most people are in love with, but it does feel like people have forgotten about Gallup. So the opportunity will be much greater for Gallup because of the presence of Cooks. And again, there's a lot of data to support that, being another year removed from the torn ACL will help him out in a personal way. So yeah, I don't know what they are, but I would take all the overs on Michael Gallup.
Okay. And special teams, how are they looking right now? Because place kicker, what is going on there?
A year ago, the 2 kickers on the roster were Jonathan Garibay and Nareem Hairulahu. Neither one made the initial roster, or the final roster, I should say, because they were so bad at camp. They were so bad in the preseason. the Cowboys had to have, tryouts during training camp and sign Brett Maher, which, was, and I mean, I killed him for that because his end with the team through his first stint was so awful. It just felt like such a horrible decision. But to Maher's credit, he was remarkable last year. I mean, I ate a lot of crow, and so did a lot of people. And then he had just the super unfortunate end in the playoffs that everybody saw. And then obviously the Niners kind of got in his head a little bit before that game. And so he's still out there. And I think his recent resume is sterling enough to the point that you would want to bring him in. But I think it's difficult to sell that. And, you have to wonder. So Tristan Vizcaino has been the only kicker on the roster for most of the offseason. Recently, the Cowboys brought in Brandon Aubrey from the USFL. But like I said, at this time a year ago, Brett Maher was nowhere near my mind.
Yeah.
So Robbie Gould and Mason Crosby and all these dudes are still hanging out there. I think it's irresponsible, but they proved a year ago that they can kind of close their eyes in the 11th hour and find someone that'll work out.
There you go. Mason Crosby reuniting with McCarthy. That makes a lot of that sounds like a Cowboy move.
He had the field goal that won the game against them in 2016 when they were the 1 seed. So it would be another kind of twist of the knife for that. But I think that's what we deserve at this point.
Okay, and they're set at punter.
Yeah, I mean Brian Anger's been awesome for them. Had a bit of a regression last year from his first season with the team, but yeah, he's great. The true question is whether they'll keep Turpin, if they really, value him as a returner, if they value that in general anymore, because it seems like most teams, are moving away.
Yeah, it's a shame because we fans like kickoff returns, but it's the way the NFL's going nowadays. And unfortunately, you're right. I mean, you can't keep a guy like Turpin on the roster if he's not going to really be productive returning kicks, which is why he's there. So. Mm-hmm. RJ, I appreciate it. Excellent first go about. I really do appreciate you educating me on what's going on with the Cowboys, especially I didn't expect all of the, roster turmoil or potential roster turmoil that's going to go on during camp this year. So
it'll make for an exciting month. That's all I care about at the end of the day.
And follow, of course. We've been showing the ticker there of where to check you out. We'll put it in the description area, links as well of where everybody can go find your content. And then also you have the podcast that we talked about, the SB Nation podcast and the Ochoa. That's podcast as well that you do?
Yeah, it is. That one we do at Blogging the Boys. So it's a way to pass the time. Really.
Keeps you busy.
Yeah.
Like you need to be more busy, right? Covering the Cowboys. Thanks, RJ. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.